Hello, I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is Life After Scientology. And as another aside, that song that you heard as the intro music to this interview is called Space Love. And if you'd be interested in hearing what else is on the album that's part of, if you go to my website, The Real Ron Miscavige, and where it says Music Media, go into that and it'll take you down and you can see the album is called Timeless. And that is the album that I did in 1974 when we were in England. And it is the one that BBC heard and asked me to play on the air. So there's another long aside, but I wanted to introduce that. And you can test out the other songs or just go ahead and get the whole album. I think you'd enjoy it very much, and I think you're going to enjoy it. But now, getting down to business. We have Mark Fisher back as a continuance of his prior interview that I did on episode number 6, where Mark tells about the corporate liaison office that he was the head of and many other interesting facts. And what I'd like to do now is continue this because there's some further adventures that I'd like you to get in on, and these aren't well publicized, and Mark was there and he was part of it. So without further ado, I got to look up that word one of these days, ado, whatever that means. I'd like to welcome Mark Fisher again. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Ron, how you doing again?
I'm doing actually pretty well. And what I'd like you to do is continue on with your story, because I think on the last interview, we ended where you had left the church and you escaped and you went into a little bit of a detail. But you had a series of incidents that happened, one in particular, and we've talked about this in the past, where a guy befriended you and he didn't turn out to be what you thought he was. And what I'd like you to do is just take that up. And like, first of all, how did you meet this guy? You just give us a little inside stuff here. Okay, buddy?
Yeah, sure. Not a problem. Well, after, I left in September 1990, at the time when you leave, you have no idea what you're going to do. I had no connection with my family. I didn't know who I was going to connect up with. And, what happened is that there were some other senior Scientology executives who had left Scientology a few months before. And they were a family. It was Terry Gamboa and her husband, Fernando, and Janice and Paul Grady. And, the first thing I did was I went on vacation. I had to get away from it all because it was such a traumatic experience. And so I went to Hawaii for 10 days and I just took a vacation and just went, I just need to relax. I got to get my mind straight and figure out what I'm going to do. And when I got back from when I got back from Hawaii, I was in San Diego and I got a phone call. The phone rings and it was Janice Grady. She going, Mark, where are you at? And then that's how we basically connected up. And I immediately the next day drove up to see them. And it was at that point that, was trying to figure out, well, what were we going to do? Because I know, Ron, you had your music and stuff when you left, but I'm sure you even had questions about, what you were going to do and, what was your life going to be like now that you're no longer part of Scientology?
Right.
So what happened was, nothing interested me. I had a long resume when I was in Scientology of overseeing projects and movies and music and construction and all sorts of things, but they really didn't translate to the real world in terms of what I wanted to do. Anyway, to make a long story short, we ended up getting together and we had a guy who was he was in Scientology, but he was basically on the outs on Scientology. And he said, hey, listen, why don't you all come and work together and you can come to Las Vegas and work for me. So that's how we ended up in Las Vegas. And that's basically where the story starts.
Okay. Now, when you say you ended up in Las Vegas, you were with Terry and Fernando and Janice and Paul, right?
Correct. Yeah. We all, moved together to Las Vegas at the same time.
Okay, now was this guy who invited you there? Is this the guy that's part of this story, or different?
No. This was a Scientologist who basically he had a successful business and he basically was on the outs. He was a friend of Terry's, and he said that he would help us get started because we had no idea what we wanted to do. So we got together and we started up at a mortgage business. And the guy that you're asking me about is actually a little bit later in the story because we actually had. Basically what happened was you think you leave Scientology and that you're done with it, but the next thing you know, they're messing with you, and we had no idea what was going on. And people have to remember, this is in the days before the internet, before cell phones. I mean, it was pay phones, and computers were all internal. There was nothing there. As a matter of fact, a lot of the work we did wasn't even on a computer.
Wow.
So, reconnecting was very difficult. Finding people was like going through the old yellow pages and white pages. I mean, it was not, oh, let me Google that. That didn't exist in those days.
Right.
So, but anyway, he offered us, let's, I've got a mortgage company, and I'll teach you the mortgage business. And that's basically how we ended up in Las Vegas.
Okay. Now, before you go on, I heard some of this story priorly. I thought the guy was in real estate. Was he just getting mortgages for people, or was he selling real estate?
No, he was actually, it wasn't real estate. He was a mortgage company. He had a mortgage company in Los Angeles, and he closed it down. And then he was in Colorado, and then he decided to open up. He already was planning on opening up something in Las Vegas. And at the time we thought, well, that sounds as good as anything. And Las Vegas was starting to take off. This was December 1990. And so, we packed up our cars and we headed there, and we got a 2-bedroom apartment, and I slept on the couch in the living room, and one couple was in one bedroom, the other couple was the other bedroom. And Janice at the time was pregnant with her first kid, and it was Sea Org. We roughed it. You know what I mean?
I know exactly. You're talking about Sea Org accommodations there, where you have two and three couples in one apartment, where it's designed for one couple.
Yeah, one couple and a kid. Yeah, and I basically was sleeping on the couch, because we didn't have much money, But basically, we got started doing that and learning the mortgage business. We had no background in that, and he helped us get started. Now, so while we were doing that, it wasn't 2-3 months into that they hired this new employee. Okay, and this guy came in to work, and he got hired, and he seemed like a nice guy, and we started, befriending him. He moved into our same apartment complex. We went to lunch with him. We played racquetball together. I mean, he became friendly, not just with me, but with Terry, Fernando, Paul. I mean, with everybody.
Yeah.
And we found out years later, we didn't know at the time, but that he was a private investigator that was sent in to basically become our friend and to find out and spy on what we were doing.
Wow. Now, what was his name?
Now, his name was Dave LeBeau, and he turned out years later to be, as a matter of fact, to this day, he's their #1 private investigator. But we didn't know at the time that was his first assignment, coming to basically live in Las Vegas and basically spy on us,
Okay, because I was wondering how you got started with him, and that would be a very secure, as far as keeping his cover, is to join a company for a job. I can see that now. So he didn't you're on the playground someplace where you're shooting basketball and say, "Hi, I'd like to be your friend."
No, not at all. And what happened, it's crazy, because he said, "Oh, I'm moving from California. I'm married. I got kids." "Well, where's your wife and kids?" "Oh, they're staying in California until I get set up and established." And, we accepted people at face value. You know how it is. You don't expect people to lie to you. And he seemed like a nice guy. And we started, hanging out together and all. But, he got to the point where we became comfortable enough with him, because at the time, we still were Scientologists, so we started disseminating to him. We gave him a Dianetics book and started talking to him about that and told him about our history and all. So, he could tell that, that we were basically just, all we were trying to do is make a living and get started. But what it turned out is that David Miscavige was concerned about us, concerned about, the fact that Terry Gamboa had been the executive director of author services that we talked about in the previous show. And of course, I had been the corporate liaison office in charge. So we were very close to David Miscavige.
Yeah. And not only that, between you and Terry, those are very high profile executive positions where a lot of inside stuff.
That's correct. And at the time, we found out later, but we did not know that it was modeled after the fact that David Miscavige had Pat Broker, who had been in, with L. Ron Hubbard when he died, and was basically David's, primary rival for, running the Scientology church. That once he left, Pat Broker left, that they hired 2 private investigators to basically follow him. And years later, we found out they were paying these guys millions of dollars, and they stayed with him for like 20 something years, like a long time. They traveled and followed this guy all over the place. So when we decided to get together in Las Vegas, I guess in David Miscavige's eyes, we were considered a potential threat because we were high-level executives all getting together, and are we planning a coup, or are we gonna, you know what I mean? It was just crazy stuff. When all we were trying to do was just get on with our lives and make some money and see what we could do.
I'll tell you, Mark, isn't that the case with most people who live, that they just want to get on with their lives? They want to change from being part of living on a compound or living in that type of system where you don't have personal freedoms. They just want to get on, get a job. And then with the church's actions, they turn them into people who are saying, hey, hang on a second. What the hell are you trying to do with me? I'm going to expose you. I think the church creates maybe 90 or 95% of all the problems they have.
I totally agree with you, Ron, and that's exactly what happened with us. They, at the time, and that was 1991. This is right around the time that the Time magazine article came out, "Cult of Greed," right? And then we were approached. Terry was approached. I wasn't, to basically be interviewed for a TV show on Scientology, and she refused to do it. We had no intention of speaking out at all. We just wanted to get on with our lives, right?
Right.
Well, it turns out we had no idea what, this was going on. But basically, the motivation we found out later was they also were worried at the time because they hadn't gotten their tax exempt status yet. That didn't happen until 1993. And Miscavige was concerned that Terry and I, who were closely involved, would be able to go to the IRS and say, hey, guess what? David Miscavige is running Scientology, and you're right. All that money was going to L. Ron Hubbard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there was concern there. So they basically came up with this whole plan to separate us. And David LeBeau was involved intrinsically in that plan.
Well, now when you separate, you're talking about separating you from Terry and Fernando?
And Janice and Paul and all of us. And of course, we had some other people, former Sea Org members. We became sort of like a refuge for people that did leave, where if we got connected with them, we'd say, hey, come and work with us. Like a guy named Jeff Walker, who was the senior case supervisor, international, and before that at Flag. He left. We found him in New Zealand. We said, why don't you come? And so he moved to Las Vegas, and he worked with us at the same company. Another gentleman by the name of Kenny Lipton, who had been a longtime executive in Scientology, he came and joined us. And so I guess, the fact that we were, consolidating all these different people and executives was perceived as a threat, when all we were doing, like you said, we were just trying to make some money.
Yep.
And then, so what happened was two different things. Okay. I had no idea what it was like to live in the real world. I had none. I went straight from high school into the Sea Org. I'm 32 years old. I've just left Scientology, and I have no idea what anything costs. How much does it pay for rent? I remember I signed a lease before I moved to Las Vegas. I signed a lease in San Diego for a studio apartment, and it was like $1,400 a month. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds right. I had no idea what anything costs. You know what I mean? And of course, it was by the beach and all that, but I had no income. I had no idea. So it wasn't long before, like about a year into it, that I basically was in financial trouble. I couldn't pay my bills and my rent, and the mortgage business wasn't going that great at the time, and I just couldn't do it. So I got a job opportunity, and I decided to move to Texas, and I went and took a job down in Texas, and Terry and Fernando. Yeah, sorry.
Before you go into that, was Dave LeBeau part of your situation down in Texas also, or no?
Well, yeah, I'm going to get to that. So he basically was an employee. He was an employee. This is how we found out. We suspected him after this. Okay. So I basically got, left Las Vegas. I had, it's really funny. The funny story is I actually got fired from the mortgage company because I was trying to get a mortgage loan closed. And some guy that we had processing it, he totally messed it up. And of course, I blew my stack, which you don't, in the real world, you don't do that. And the owners of the company were not Scientology. They were like, you can't do that, and you're gone, So I got fired, and then I got this job opportunity. Meanwhile, Terry and Fernando were given this opportunity down in Australia. Okay, this is where the separation came from. We didn't know it at the time, but there was they had this gentleman pose as this investor out of Hong Kong. He came to visit the mortgage company we were working at, and he had this opportunity. He really liked Terry and Fernando, and he set it up where he goes, listen, we entertain a lot of high profile clients in Australia, and we do business in Hong Kong. So listen, here's what we really like you. So here's what we'll do. We'll pay you X thousands of dollars a year you go move down to Australia. We want you to find a horse ranch for us where we can entertain these clients. Now Miscavige knew that Terry was totally into horses. You know what I mean? And so he said big ice cream sundae with the cherry on top. We found out later on that was all set up by Scientology. And of course, Terry and Fernando, they moved to Australia. I moved to Texas, and we were basically separated. And then how Dave LeBeau comes involved in this is as soon as I went to Texas, I wasn't down there 2 weeks, and he flew down there in a big Cadillac, and he had no reason to be down in Texas. And he just was like, hey, I'm down here, doing some business, and I thought I'd check up on you and all that. He started asking me questions about David Miscavige. I'm going like, this is really weird. Wow. So when he left, I called Janice Grady in Las Vegas, and I said, I think this guy, Dave LeBeau, is a plant. And a plant in Scientology term means he's a spy. And she goes, yeah, well, we were kind of thinking maybe something fishy too. And sure enough, he then went down to Australia to visit Terry and Fernando on vacation. Meanwhile, he's not closing any or making any money at the mortgage company. He has no form of, no visible means of income that we can see. And he goes down there to visit them for 2 weeks to check up on them. So it became very fishy.
Yeah, Mark, before you continue, look, this stinks. You see that in retrospect, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Was there any sign that you just didn't take up on it, or are you that trusting that everybody's telling you the truth?
Well, I'll tell you, absolutely. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. First of all, we were very trusting. You know how it is when you're in Scientology, you're not allowed to lie to somebody, because if you lie, it's going to come up in your counseling session.
Okay.
And you're going to get in ethics trouble, and so you take everybody at face value. If they tell you something, you believe them unless you go and you look and find out that that's not true.
As
and then
unbelievable
they're
as
in trouble.
Sound to some listener, I'm telling you, I can see that your minds were set that way because of your experience and being on staff. I can see that.
Absolutely. And I got taken by several people that I trusted. You know what I mean? I just, you naturally assume people are looking out the best for you. And it takes a little bit of time after being out to realize that, everybody's got a little bit of their own agenda, and they don't always, tell you the truth up front, Yeah.
Oh,
so there were indicators, but like I said, we found out about him, and we suspected, but we weren't sure.
Yeah.
And so then what happened was Janice finally found out through a mutual friend of this guy, Dave LeBeau's, who was not a Scientologist. He had admitted to this friend, Dave LeBeau had, that he was basically being paid to spy on us here in Las Vegas.
Wow.
So anyway, and that's what happened with that. So I'm down in Texas working and all that. Make a long story short, I end up coming back to Las Vegas about 2 years later because Paul and Janice Grady have taken over the company, and they wanted me to come back. Terry and Fernando came back. Now, this was after '93 when the IRS tax exemption had happened for Scientology.
Okay, and now obviously Terry and Fernando came back from Australia, right? How long were they down there?
They were down there for, I think, 2 or 3 years. Like, I came back first, but then they came back shortly thereafter. And we didn't know at the time, but it was coincident with, they got their IRS tax exemption. There's no reason for us to be paying them all this money to be down in Australia. Now, I wasn't paid by Scientology on Texas. I've never been paid anything by Scientology. I've never, they've never offered me money, and I've never been paid for anything. But they were down there on this ruse down in Australia, which they didn't know. So anyway, so they had nothing else to do because the job was done. So they thought, well, we'll come back to Las Vegas.
Yeah. And you say they were in Australia for about a year?
No, it was a couple of years. It was 2, maybe 3 years.
They lived in Australia for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. They actually found a horse property that they bought with these investors' money. And then they boarded horses, and it was all basically hundreds of thousands of dollars that was spent on this total ruse,
Now look at this. This is a church spending that much money to, quote, handle its parishioners who they suspect, not that you've actually done anything, they suspect of you coming out and undermining them or exposing some of their abuses. Could you imagine if another church like the Catholic Church, could you even imagine the Catholic Church or the Mormons doing this? I can't.
No, no, not at all. First of all, if you decided you weren't going to be part of a church anymore, you would just say, "Hey, I'm done with this. It's not part of my belief system, and I'm gone," and then let you go.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is how crazy it was. Now, we had no idea how much this guy was being paid, right? We found out years later that these private investigators are paid a lot of money, as you well know, Ron, with the guys that were following you.
Well,
they paid them top dollar.
They were getting paid $10,000 a week to follow me. And they followed me for over a year at $10,000 a week.
Yeah.
But
and then
what a life that is, Mark. You have no life. You're tailing your, as they called me, their target from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, 7 days a week.
Right.
That's like doing time. You know, You don't get paid that much if you go to prison. So I guess that's the upside. They get a lot of money for following me.
Well, and then it came out later, the two people that were following Pat Broker for 20-something years, they'd been paid over $12 million.
Jesus.
And I'm not lying. This is in news reports and all that. Over $12 million during that time, personally, the two guys,
Wow.
So it was a good living, but, it was like you said, it's not a fun living. I mean, they basically have to stay hidden and all that. But anyway, I don't really actually cut them any slack because I think it's kind of a low life type of thing. If you're going to be paid just to spy on somebody because they were part of a church, I mean, that makes no sense, No, back to the story. So what happened? We get back to Las Vegas, and Dave LeBeau at this time, he's kind of like he's still he's left the company, but he's still kind of around. We were no longer really a threat or anything like that. Okay. Next step of the story. I get back to Las Vegas. And when I was in the C organization and in Scientology, I told you in the last show, I did the rehabilitation project for us. And the person that I helped to graduate with me, her name was Stacy Young. And she was married to Robert Vaughn Young. He's known on the internet as Robert Vaughn Young, but he was Vaughn Young when he was in the C organization. He was a high-level executive at Author Services, and he handled all of L. Ron Hubbard's public relations at Author Services. He helped edit the Mission Earth books for L. Ron Hubbard. He did a lot of things. And he also, before that, had been a spokesman for the Guardian's office. So he and his wife, Stacy, who also had been a high-level executive Author Services, they had left Scientology before I even did. They were gone. Well, at the time, it turns out that they were actually being hired. They got hired as consultants for a lawsuit that was going on at the time, where they basically were being paid to consult with the attorneys against Scientology and explain what are Scientology's policies, what do they do, and that type of thing. They were getting paid a lot of money to do that. Well, I had no contact with them. We had no internet. We had no nothing, And I somehow ran across somebody who knew where they were. And so I reconnected with them when I moved back in December 1993, and I spent Christmas with them. They were in Corona del Mar in California. And we were old friends, and so we got back together. Well, that put me on the radar again. I'm now connected to these two people that are now, testifying and helping, a lawsuit against Scientology.
Was this the one that Bob Minton was running?
Well, it gets to that, okay, because that's the next chapter, okay. Oh. Anyway, so I'm working in Las Vegas back in the company. Vaughn and Stacy Young, Robert Vaughn Young and Stacy Young, they're testifying and they're doing all sorts of things for these lawsuits, and they're getting paid a lot of money. Anyway, they end up moving up to Seattle, Washington, and I used to go up and visit. I'd go up there for a weekend and visit from time to time, and they were under intense pressure, and they didn't know who it was that was behind it. Well, they said there was this guy who was out there. They had people protesting in front of their house. They had, at the time, they were running basically a cat sanctuary where they adopted cats, and then they would adopt them out. Like they'd find stray cats or whatever, they get them the shots and they'd adopt them out. So their house had lots of cats in it. Well, all of a sudden, all these public people were saying like, oh, their cats have AIDS, and they were filing complaints with the city of Seattle, in the Seattle area, and basically a lot of dirty tricks against them. So they told me there was a guy up there, and I said, well, we had this guy, Dave LeBeau. Let me send you a picture of him. And so I emailed the picture up to Vaughn Young, and he goes, that's the guy.
Wow.
That's the guy. He was up there at that time organizing and running all the protests and trying to get these people, Vaughn and Stacey Young, to stop and basically make their life miserable. So that's where we got confirmation that this guy was definitely a dirty private investigator. Next step was Robert Minton, and if you want, I can go into that briefly. Stacey then,
I think you should, because I brought up his name just for somebody who's not tracking with this.
Sure. Well, what happened after that was, Vaughn and Stacey Young, they were up there and they basically got connected up with this multi-millionaire. His name was Robert Minton. And he had seen some of the TV shows that they had done and also their work on the internet. And he was a non-Scientologist, but he basically decided that it was a freedom of speech issue because Scientology was trying to stop the, anybody talking badly about them on the internet. And that's how he got involved with the whole thing. But he had a lot of money and he started putting his own money into funding, hey, this needs to be stopped, So
Right.
he hooked up with Vaughn and Stacey Young, and basically they got involved, and he was financing a lot of the stuff, and they were on the media, et cetera, et cetera. It jumps forward to the whole Lisa Mcpherson story down in Clearwater. And Lisa Mcpherson, if anybody doesn't know, was a Scientologist who basically had a psychotic break, and she died in their care. Okay.
Right.
Well, the city of Clearwater and whatever the county down there decided to bring criminal charges against David Miscavige. And this is in the late 90s. Okay. So this is when we found out that we had another private investigator come into our life here in Las Vegas. And that was the guy who posed as my friend. Robert Minton and Stacey Young, they went and moved to Clearwater, and they opened up what they called the Lisa Mcpherson Trust to basically protest right in front of Scientology's face, right at the Flag Land base. And that's a whole nother issue of what happened down there with that. But they set up a whole group there basically fighting Scientology, and Scientology fought back pretty hard. We had friends that went down there. Jesse Prince went down there and became part of the Lisa Mcpherson Trust, and I was friends with Jesse and for many years, and then also Stacey. So I was in routine communication with them. Well, it turned out in the late 90s, Dave Miscavige was personally under investigation for some kind of criminal charge involved with this. Right. So he was down there full time, I think, right? I don't know if you can fill in that side, if you remember when he was in Clearwater then.
Well, I couldn't fill in the exact dates, but I knew this took a lot of his attention. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm going to shorthand this because it can get really involved. But basically, what happened was they sent in another guy that we hired at the company that we worked at. First, they sent in a woman. It was his wife, and she started working, and then she became friends with me. And then he came on, and his name was Ferris Khan. And this guy came in, and same thing. He came into the company and wanted to be a loan officer, and he was working. At the time, he befriended Terry and Fernando, and he became very good friends with them. I didn't really have much interaction with him. We didn't know at the time, but the reason he was sent in was because of the Lisa Mcpherson, that David Miscavige was worried again that Terry or myself or Janice or whoever was here might go down to Florida and talk to the authorities down there and tell them how basically David Miscavige runs everything.
Right.
We found this out later, and I'll get to how we found that out. But that's why they sent this guy in. So, he's involved. And after a little bit of time, I decide, I'm going to leave the company and go to a different company. And then this guy, Ferris Khan, then becomes friends with me. All of a sudden, he's in my life. And we're going out together. We have dinner together, become friendly, and that type of thing. And he, at the time when I left the company that I was at with Terry, Fernando, and Janice and Paul, when I left to go out on my own, I didn't have a lot of money. So he basically said, hey, listen, I want to make it easy for you. I'm thinking about setting up a cell phone company, and I need you to write an employee manual for this company that, we'll set up, and I'll pay you to do that.
Right.
Okay, fine. So I did. So I wrote this whole employee manual. Well, it turns out that I also became friendly enough with him, same thing, where I told him about my history in Scientology and what was Scientology and all that. And then he was following the different stuff that was happening on the internet. And I was wondering, well, I wonder if this guy has any, connection to Scientology or whatever. But I sort of brushed it aside because you asked, did I see anything, right?
Yeah.
Well, when when Robert Minton and Stacy and Jesse all went down to Clearwater, I thought, hey, I'm going to go down and visit them. That's really cool. So I said, hey, Ferris, I'm going down to Clearwater. You want to come with me? He goes, yeah, sure. Let me come with you. You know, we'll go down there and we'll have a good time down in Florida, and you can see your friends. Well, what turns out was when Dave Miscavige found out that I was coming down there, he gave instructions to Marty Rathman.
Yeah.
And the reason I know this is because Marty told me the story later. He gave instructions that Fisher is not to set foot in Florida. Do something and get him away from here. That's what's the instructions that he was given. So what happened then is that Ferris Khan then sets up this thing saying, oh, Mark, hey, listen, we can't go down to Florida. We can't go to Florida. I've got an investor in my company. He wants to meet with us, and we're going to get an all expense paid trip to Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. It's all expenses paid. You know, we get a vacation out of it, and we just have to meet with this guy. It's no problem, but it's got to be that same weekend we were going to Clearwater.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of hemmed and hawed because I wanted to go see my friends down there. But basically, I eventually said, all right, fine. Yeah, we'll do that, and we'll go down to Clearwater some other time. So we then go down to Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. And what I found this out 9 years later was when Mark Rathbun left Scientology. He'd been out, Marty Rathbun, and he started speaking out and on the internet after a few years after being out. And so I called him up and I talked to him. I said, Marty, how come you guys had a spy, Dave LeBeau? How come you had this guy in Las Vegas spying on us? Because all we were doing was trying to make money and live our lives. And that's where I found out that the reason they did it was because of the IRS thing. That was his motivation, but also the fact that Dave liked the reports. He wanted to know everything that we were doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's why it continued. But then he dropped the hint, and he goes, well, we also had somebody there too in like the late 90s and 2000s too. I said, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, as a matter of fact, we had this guy set up a trip and we took you down to Puerto Vallarta down in Mexico. Now, Marty Rathbun had no idea who this guy was because I had never even mentioned it to him.
Yeah.
But I said to him, wait a second, that's my friend Ferris Khan. I just got off the phone with him an hour ago. He goes, I don't know who the guy's name was. It was set up by the Office of Special Affairs, but we had this guy. And then he told me from his end what happened. I just about fell on the floor. I was flabbergasted.
I'll tell you, this is real cloak and dagger shit.
Absolutely. And the thing is that I became so close with this guy that I literally talked with him 2 or 3 times a day on the phone. He lived in Phoenix at that point, and I was in Las Vegas. Okay. And I talked to him all the time, and we talked about politics. We talked about my finances, taxes, all sorts of things. He knew everything about me. And I didn't realize it until 2009, almost 10 years later, that all of that was being fed back to Scientology because he was being paid that whole time to spy on me. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I found out about it. But anyway, so I go on this trip down to Mexico with him. And while we're down there, we're having a good time down in Mexico, and we go out to these nightclubs and this and that. And then we finally meet this investor at a dinner at a restaurant. And this guy had flown in from Italy, quote unquote. He didn't say barely 2 words. It turns out he was a private investigator as well. Well, we talked a little bit about the business, and then of course it was over. Yeah, it was over. We flew back to Las Vegas and back home, and it was done. Mission accomplished. I hadn't gone to Florida. So, unbeknownst to me.
Let me just get in there. So now you go to dinner, right?
Huh?
The guy's from Italy?
He says he's an American, but he says, yeah, he lives in Italy.
Okay. Like what did you talk about for the entire dinner?
To be honest with you, we probably talked a little bit about the cell phone business and this and that, but I just don't remember exactly. It lasted an hour and we were done, yet we'd been down in Mexico for 5 days.
Jesus.
Yeah. So we fly back to Las Vegas and whatever, and then nothing comes of this investor. No, for the business. You know what I'm saying? So what I found out later on from Marty Rathbun again was that, unbeknownst to me, that this Ferris Khan had a hidden camera, and he videotaped me in a nightclub with a stripper getting a lap dance, a table dance, and took a video. And I said, how do you know that? He goes, oh, he sent the video to us, And I'll never forget, Dave watched it with me, and we were going like, look at that guy, what a piece of crap, you know, and this and that, blah, 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 blah. But basically,
Wow.
they were trying to get blackmail material on me. Do you know what I'm saying? That, in
Unreal.
other words, like, and they trust me, they tried to use it later on.
Yeah.
Now, I hadn't spoken a word. The reason they did this was they wanted to keep me out of Clearwater, and they didn't want me to speak up to anybody. You know
Well,
what I mean?
this is their MO. They character assassinate anybody who leaves. So you're part of a club. Everybody who leaves, they have hate videos on you, or they'll go through your pre-clear folders, you know, where you're getting auditing or counseling, and see some disreputable things that you did. Just as if, you know, if you went to a Catholic church and confessed to a priest, there's no digital tape recorder and a video camera in there. You confess your
Right.
sins. The priest gives you a penance to say. You say your prayers, and you're forgiven. Not so with the church. You know that, Mark.
Absolutely. And so what's crazy about this whole thing is that, you know, this guy was paid. I mean, when I found out how much the private investigators were paid following Pat Broker, well, and then I started putting two and two together about this guy who was my friend for 10 years. He must have made hundreds of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
just reporting up on information on me. You know what I mean? And it just blew my mind that this had happened. You know, he knew everything about me. He knew taxes. He knew my, information, finances. Matter of fact, he borrowed money from me so he could pay the IRS. He needed to borrow like a couple $1,000s. I lent it to him. I said, look, I resisted. I didn't want to lend it to him. He goes, that's because I told him I don't like collecting from friends. He says, no, I'll pay you back. Well, 2 years later go by, he hasn't paid me back. Hey, whatever happened to that money you were going to pay me back? Oh, I'm not going to pay you. He goes, and I said, why? He goes, oh, I paid for that whole trip to Puerto Vallarta, which, you know, he didn't pay for. It was paid for by
He
Scientology.
didn't pay 2 cents toward that trip.
No, no. So it's like, and he was such a, like, you know, I'm going to pay you. You know, I paid for that whole trip down there. He goes, you know, you owe me. It was basically, oh yeah, it's my fault. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, so we kept up, and then the Lisa Mcpherson thing went away. I mean, you know, Dave wasn't charged with anything, and they settled the case. So then it was like, okay, I'm not so much of a target anymore. But this guy continued to report on me from time to time, and they used some of this material and also gathered other material later on when I did finally start speaking out on the internet in 2008.
Right.
Okay. And that's around the time, of course, the internet was really taking off then. Did you have a question? I wasn't sure.
No. I remember that, and you were interviewed with the Tampa Bay Times, weren't you?
Well, that was later. What happened was in 2008, remember the anonymous movement, you know, the internet people who were protesting in front of all the Scientology organizations with the masks and everything. Well, they were protesting, first of all, that Tom Cruise video that came out, and they were protesting disconnection. Well, I saw how many people I was really, the first protest they had it all over the world, and they had YouTube videos, and there were thousands of people out there, and that got me motivated, you know. So I decided that I'm just going to go attend a disconnect. They were having a rally in Los Angeles, out in front of the church buildings down there, and so I decided to go with a bunch of friends to finally go and protest for the first time.
Right.
All right. Well, and they took pictures of me. Scientology took pictures of me, you know, and all that out protesting. And it was really funny. I got a famous picture that I took of myself where somebody was standing, one of the people, protesters, was standing with a sign that said, Mike Rinder had blown at that point. So it said, Rinder has blown and so can you, you know?
Yeah.
And Mike Rinder hadn't come out yet. He was out, but he hadn't really started speaking out, you know?
Yeah.
So, so it was pretty interesting. And I was out there with Mark and Claire Headley. That's where I first met them after leaving the CU Oregon. And your granddaughter, Jenna Miscavige, was there. She hadn't come out with her book, but she'd done some interviews. So I was out there to support them because I thought they deserve support. I had been sitting and not saying anything for years, so I'm actually going to go out and say something.
Right.
So I go out there, and sure enough, what happens? They have my sister, who was a public Scientologist and had been for years, send my mother a whole bunch of blackmail material on me, basically, that they gathered, and the only way they could get it was from this guy Ferris Khan. because there were photographs that I'd sent him and things like that. And they basically, my sister, tried to get me to shut up, and they did it. Scientology tried to get me shut up by using my sister, sending this stuff to my mother, who was in her 80s and lived here in Las Vegas and had never been a Scientologist. They said my sister threatened my mother that she would disconnect from her if I didn't shut up on the internet and didn't start, keep speaking. So, that's what they did. They ended up using all this stuff to try. And of course, my mother's going like, this has nothing to do with me. She didn't understand it. What are you talking about? Sure enough, my sister disconnected from her,
So what happened to your sister?
Well, after that, of course, this is like a soap opera. It goes on and on forever. After that, like I finally found out, like I said, I talked to Marty Rathbun in 2009. He told me about the background of what was going on. And that's when I spoke in the Tampa Bay Times, which was the St. Petersburg Times at the time, for the Truth Rundown series. And that's when I first actually publicly spoke out, and they videotaped. Joe Childs interviewed me, the whole bit. And that's when it first came out, again, because the reason I did it was to support the people that came out, because the first version of the Truth Rundown came out, and of course Scientology attacks, oh, that never happened. He never physically attacked anybody, nothing like that, And I went, okay, that's it. I've had enough of this. So then that's when I went out and spoke up about that. My friend Ferris Khan, he had no idea. When I found out from Marty Rathbun that he was a spy, and then I had confirmed it, right? I decided not to tell Ferris, okay? And until I did the story with the Tampa Bay Times.
Right.
And I did that interview in August 2009, but it didn't come out till November. So I played along with him. And then the night before the actual newspaper article was coming out, I said, you're going to want to see the Tampa Times tomorrow. I think you'll be interested in the article. So the next day, the article comes out, and he sends me an email. And of course, my question to him immediately is when he called me was like, look, I have one question for you. Did you or did you not get paid to spy on me? He would not answer that question. Yeah. I had to, in Scientology terms, TR3 it. Did you or did you not get paid by Scientology? It wasn't a yes or no. If you hadn't been paid, it'd be a definite no, right? Yeah. And you know what I mean? And of course, he would never say yes. What does he do? He turns it around on me. It's all your fault. You did this and you did that. And you. You know what I'm talking about, Ron? Listen, it's all your fault.
The way the church operates, if you're walking down the street and somebody comes and hits you on the head and robs you, they'll take you in an auditing session and try to find out what you did to pull that in, to make that happen. I mean, we're talking about that level of nonsensibility, okay? So
exactly,
he did the standard thing.
Yeah, so he did that.
Thing. I'm talking about the standard operating policy of the church.
Yeah, but I mean, that was the whole thing. So I basically said, listen, I never want to talk to you until you can answer that question for me. So years later, a couple of years go by, and he tries reaching out to me. This is 2011 or whatever, 2012. I forget when it was exactly, but he reached out to me, and I said, I never want to talk to you again, and here's why. And this is a story about my sister.
Yeah.
My sister had been disconnected from my mother, and then, of course, I had been disconnected from her for years, My sister was such a big Scientologist that when our father died in 1996, because he was a declared suppressive person, she didn't even bother going to the funeral. You know what I mean? That's how disconnected she was from our family. Okay. Yeah. She could have come to the funeral, not talked to us, nothing, but she didn't even bother coming. Okay. And, this is like, I hate to say this, because my sister was a great woman, great girl, great mother. But, my dad, you know how it is. My dad supported my sister. He paid for her going through college, and all that. She just completely disregarded him.
Wow.
So then when about, I think it was 2011 or 12, my sister had been disconnected from our family. I just happened to be, on Facebook, and sometimes it'll pop up friends. I made a new friend with somebody who used to be in Scientology, and you look at their page and it has pictures of their friends, and my sister's picture was there, and I'm thinking, well, how's this guy friends with my sister if he's out? So I clicked on my sister's Facebook page, and I noticed that everybody was talking about her in the past tense. Oh, Betsy Fisher, she was such a good person. She was a piano teacher. She was a musician. She studied concert piano in college at Syracuse University, and then she was a piano teacher all her life, right?
Yeah.
Oh, she's such a great teacher. Oh, we really miss her, and this and that, blah 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 blah. And I'm going like, this is in June of the, whatever it was. I can't remember the exact year, but it was June of that year. And so I started going earlier and earlier and earlier, people talking about her in past tense. I find out that in November that she had passed away. Okay. She was 56 years old and she had died. Nobody bothered to tell our family. We had no idea. I found out on Facebook, okay, that she'd been dead for 8 months and nobody told us. Her husband didn't call and tell us. None of his family called to tell us. Nobody told anybody in our family, and I found out. I immediately called my brother, who's not a Scientologist and lives in Ohio, and I said, Doug, I can't believe this. And so he called up and got the death certificate online, and that's how we confirmed it. The hard thing was is I then had to tell my mother that my sister had died, and that was one of the hardest days I've ever had.
There is no compassion in the Church of Scientology, and it is the one.
That's exactly right.
The most noticeable thing you can find out if you were to study all different religions, no matter what you think of them, what their beliefs are. And you might say, well, I don't know how they could believe that. That's fine. It's a religion. A person believes what they want to believe. They all have compassion. There is none in the Church of Scientology. They don't give a hoot about you. If you're in trouble, they will reg people for services or to build a new building so they can show that they're doing something to forward the movement. And these new buildings are empty. I think I said in one of the prior episodes, as a matter of fact, I did, but I'll say it again. In Milwaukee, I went and I happened to be in a strip mall where they have their little mission. And I looked on the door, and the hours of that mission are 7 to 9 o'clock at night. That's the level of delivery that they're producing for the people in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they build buildings saying that we're expanding. Those buildings are filled with air. And that's what they're doing to show, hey, we're an expanding religion. It's baloney, man. But getting back to the point I was making, that compassion factor is totally missing. Like your sister.
Right. You're absolutely 120% correct.
Yeah.
My father told me this after I left, and I totally believe it too. He said, you know what was missing from Scientology? He said love and compassion. The concept of love is also missing too. Oh, they talk about it, but they don't really mean it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
In my opinion, L. Ron Hubbard talks about, man's lowest common denominator is trying to survive. Well, everything's trying to survive, right?
Yeah.
But what is man actually seeking? To me, it's to love and to be loved, and that was completely missing from Scientology. You know what I mean? There's nothing greater than having the love of your kids, the love of your family, the love of your friends, and vice versa. It's a two-way street. To me, it's the greatest high there is when you're in love or when you love somebody. That means it's unconditional. You see it with your dogs. Your dogs are, hey, I'm happy to see you no matter what, and that it's just a great.
And I'll tell you,
feeling.
You belong to that church, and over the years, they can wipe that out of you. Listen, my daughters don't speak to me. My two daughters, Denise and Lori, who I love, I love them,
unconditionally.
Unconditionally, I guess that's the right word. And my grandchildren, which I had great times with while I was still in communication with them. My grandchildren. But my great-grandchildren, from their children, I've never even met.
Wow.
And this is a product of the Church of Scientology. And anybody who's listening to this, please try to spread these episodes around, because the more people watching this, the more educated we're going to get the public. So we can save many people from making a mistake of getting involved with them.
Well, I'll tell you, Rod, the funny thing is that you mentioned that. I totally agree with you. And the thing is that what church does that? That makes no sense.
No.
You know what I mean? The whole thing about the disconnection. It's about control. Look, if you're a true believer in something, You can listen to other viewpoints. You're not going to change your viewpoint if you were a true believer in whatever it is that you're involved with. But when
Right.
they cut you off from your family, look at, I have a message for all the people, the OSA people that are probably watching this. Do you want to know something? When it's all said and done, and you're done with Scientology, to the staff out there, guess what? The only people that are there for you are your family.
Yeah.
Scientology is going to give you $500 and kick you out the door, if that.
Yeah.
You know, you can work for years and years and years, you know, 16, 18 hours a day for $50 a week or whatever they're paying you. At the end of the day, when you get old, you're out on the street.
Yeah.
You know this, Ron. You're out on the street. And guess what? Who's there for you? Your family.
Yep.
Scientology is not there for you.
No, they're not. They're not at all. Well, I'll tell you, Mark, that's a hell of a story. Now, look, you've been out for a lot of years. How is it going now for you?
Yeah, no, I wanted to tell you about that, Ron, briefly. You know, it's like I've been out now coming up on 28 years this September, it'll be, but it seems like yesterday. You know, I had my ups and downs like anybody, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't trade being free from Scientology and that organization for anything. The reason is that I can make my own choices and my own decisions. When you're on staff or you're a public Scientologist, your only decisions are what's good for Scientology. It's not what's good for your personal life or your family or your friends. It's about what's good for Scientology. So all of a sudden now, you know, when you get out, it takes time, man. If anybody's recently out and they're listening to this, it takes time, you know, to get away from it. But guess what? Just keep living your life. You know, one of the things I decided when I left Scientology was that I wasn't going to do something unless it was fun. Okay. And that doesn't mean everything has to be fun and happy. Yeah, Yahoo, it's a party. I mean, I wanted to make the decision that I wanted to enjoy what I was doing because it was not worth my time otherwise. Now, I haven't always lived up to that, but that's been my guiding philosophy. Yeah. And the thing is that, you know, a lot of religions, Scientology and all that, you're always trying to get to some destination. But you know what? It's really about enjoying the ride. It's the journey. You know, you should live life every day and enjoy your life, enjoy your family, your friends, what you're doing. And that's what life's all about, you know? It's not about, oh my God, I'm going to heaven or hell. It's like, no, live each day as it's your last day. Live each day and find happiness in what you're doing.
Well, that's a hell of a philosophy, but I agree with you 100%, Mark. And look, I play music for enjoyment. I enjoy music because I've been a musician my whole life. But these videos and these interviews and getting people to speak out, I feel it's my duty. And I really appreciate you coming on and giving us your viewpoint and your story. The story is, it's, you know, truth is stranger than fiction. And
I know.
It's somebody.
Well, that's why I speak out too,
okay,
Ron.
Mark is telling us a story that he made up. No, that's the hell of it. You're telling the truth.
Listen, my brother who got declared at 16, and he's a classical musician in a symphony orchestra, and he's played music all his life. He's seen my ups and downs over the years, and he said to me, and he doesn't know any different, but he said to me, he goes, you know something, Mark, you're a survivor, you know? You know, you take your ups and your downs, but you know what? You always end up on your feet and you're always moving forward. And I said, that's just the way I am. You know, I have my ups, I have my downs, but you know, you're just constantly making changes because you can't be a victim in life. And I know Scientology goes, oh, you're a victim. No, you got to change your circumstances and just keep moving forward. You know, that's the way I look at it. And I've never been paid a penny for speaking out against Scientology all these years. So they can always say, oh yeah, they're doing it for money. Yeah, that's BS. You know what I mean? I do it like you said. I do it because I feel I have an obligation to the staff and Scientologists that are still in, that were friends of mine. Because guess what? I've had quite a few of them come out years later, like you, for instance, and it's like old home week. You know what I mean? We're still buddies. You know, to me, it's like Vietnam vets getting back together. You know, we share old war stories. We have a good time.
That's right, man. I'll tell you something. You hit a point there because the thing I miss about it is the friends that I made. Because look, I was on staff for 26 and a half years. And when I see somebody come out or make a move to better their life by getting away from them, it makes me happy. And I love to connect up with people like that.
I totally with you, Ron. And of course, you and I have had some times to socialize in the last couple of months, and there was a whole group of us, and there were people I hadn't seen in 25, 30 years. It was just great to see them and catch. It was like no time had elapsed. You know what I mean? And it was just fun. I agree with you.
Okay, so have we told a story?
I think so.
Mark, I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you having me on, Ron. You're really one of the really truly great guys. One of the truly great people that I've met in my life, and I'm really really proud to call you my friend.
I appreciate that. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'll take it. So listen, thanks again, Mark. And this is Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. See you on the next episode.